guys, glad to be back with you again this week. So hopefully you have been taking up my invitation to spend a little bit more time in nature over the last couple of weeks, and please do share what you see about that for yourself in terms of how nature is one of our greatest teachers about the principles that we have, and it's accessible for pretty much all of us in any way, shape or form. So I'd love to see what you're seeing new about the principles as a result of these videos and as a result of being out in nature a little bit more. So today's topic, I wanted to talk about perfect timing, it's called. And I was reflecting on this as I was thinking, as I've been out walking in the woods and been out and about recently, that as I've been recording this for you, the seasons have changed, right? So it's moved from summer into autumn. The weather has closed in, the rains have started, the soil is cold to the touch, and a whole different sort of jobs to do in the garden, whole different colours on the trees. There's a whole shift towards like a more dormant season, a quieter season, a final flush of colour before, time to hunker down for the winter, if you like. And you can kind of feel that in the air. The invitation is to huddle in and keep warm, and it's not the exuberance and the outsideness and the joy of summer. It's the closing in, the warming up, the hunkering down of this season. And the thing that the phrase that came to mind as I was reflecting on this course, on this action module today, is perfect timing. But it's also, the other phrase that came to mind is, it's just the way of it. So we all know, right? The seasons change. Depending on where you live in the world, that's more or less dramatic, right? But in the UK here, we have, one of the reasons I have travelled around the world and came back and live in the UK is because the seasons. So we have this, the joy of all the buds coming out, starting to appear in spring. I really saw that for the first time this year as I was connecting in nature. Like, I saw leaves appear for the first time. I became much more in tune with what was happening in nature in 2020 as a result of being more interested and being more present. But I started to notice when the leaves started to uncurl, I could see when they started to go from brown to green, I could see all the buds appearing and the blossom and all that promise of new fresh life. And as a gardener, it's when all your hard work over the winter starts to get really exciting, because you start to plant things out into the garden, you see the ends of the frosts, you start to see new life emerging from everything that you've been nurturing. Everything that's been going on under the ground over winter starts to bear fruit in the spring. And so it's a time of new beginnings, right? It's a time of, cheesy, but it's like baby lambs and all that, right? So it's a time for fresh starts. And there's a real feeling in the air of that, of possibility, of hope, of new beginnings, of what might happen. And I don't know, all of that kind of feeling to the season of spring. And then we move into summer and it's just like full out flamboyant, right? It's like really everything is thriving. The garden is just overflowing with flowers. It's there's just an abundance of life. There's an abundance of energy. There's a huge amount of form, right? There's lots we can see going on in terms of colours and shapes, and gardens overflowing and grass growing everywhere and weeds going crazy, and everything's just in full bloom. Then we have the hunkering down of autumn. And then we have the beautiful quietness of winter, where there's less form. There are no leaves on the trees. There are no flowers blooming in the garden. But there's life happening underneath the soil. It's all going on there. Like, I didn't realize this until this year, how much work goes into creating next year's garden right now. So I'm putting out little tiny seedlings, and I'm sowing seeds, and you don't see much above the ground, but underneath the soil there's just life happening, right? It's like they're growing these really big, strong root systems so that they can really power out in spring and blossom. As opposed to, if I plant the same seeds in spring, they won't have the same root system, and they'll flower, but they won't flower as long, they won't be as strong, they won't have as many flowers. They don't have the foundations because they haven't had that period of quiet to really bed in their roots. And it's like the seasons, the cyclical nature of life, right, to my mind. So there are times in our life when we are totally on our game, right? We're creating, we're in flow, there's form being created, there's conversations happening, there's new friends being met, there's businesses being created, new careers being forged, heading out into the world, maybe holidays happening. Like there's a full-on outward expression of life pouring out into the world of form. And then there are times in our lives where it looks like we're losing that. It looks like the leaves are falling from the tree. If we didn't know that this is just the way of it, we would panic every time the leaves fell off the tree. We'd think they're broken. We think there's something going wrong, but they're not like they were last week. They're not looking as healthy. They have less form. They're becoming bare. Something's going horribly wrong. But actually, because we know it's the way of it, we don't give it a second thought. We appreciate the beauty of it. We see the necessity of it. But we don't often have the same grace with ourselves. So there are times when there's less form. There's times when there's quiet, periods of quiet reflection, where it looks like there's not much going out happening. There's not much creation happening. There's not much things coming into the world of form. We don't appear to be doing very much. But those periods of quietness, to my mind, they're vital for the next round of growth, right? For the next round of thriving. Now, and that cycle continues like over and over again, right? So huge amounts of form, periods of quiet, huge amounts of form, periods of quiet, huge amounts of expression, rest and rejuvenation. Now, for my first 40 years of my life, I was signed up for the spring and summer course. Like if I'm not doing spring and summer, there's something wrong. And so I would ignore any invitations to quieten. I was all about, but I've got this thriving garden. How do I get to? and every time it felt like the garden wasn't thriving, I'd go into kind of panic, insecure mode and whir faster to try and plant more seeds so that there'd be more gardens, so that God forbid there not be a garden. God forbid there be bare, empty soil. Just the thought of it terrified me. And so driven by that insecurity, I would create more and more and more and more form and drive myself faster and faster and faster and think more about the world of form, because it's really important. It's really important that there's lots of stuff happening and going on, and there's rules about how this life should look, and it needs to be thriving. And I've decided thriving means loads of flower, loads of form, going out with people, being sociable, creating things. And any minute there was like what looked like procrastination, or lying on the sofa watching Netflix, or lazy mornings, or God forbid a school summer holiday with nothing planned in it, I would just go into absolute fear, because I had no connection to nature. I had no deep-seated knowing of the ebbs and flows of life. Even though I was surrounded by it and have been my whole life, like nature couldn't be more obvious that there are seasons, right? But when we've talked about this in previous modules, but when we're not open for looking, like we just don't see that. And so it's so helpful to me to know that over the course of a year, right, I will have times of intense creativity, and I'll have times of rest and rejuvenation where I won't feel inclined to do much. And that's okay. It strikes me that I see that over the period of a week, the same thing will happen. There'll be periods of flurries of activity, and then there'll be periods of lying on the sofa doing nothing. There'll be periods of running around the garden doing things, and then there'll be periods of sitting having a cup of tea and doing nothing at all. There's either things being created or not. And I see it even on a daily basis or an hourly basis, right? The same cycle. But where we get caught up is life is living us in this way, right? There's an intelligence behind the design that for us to thrive means we need all of it. I thought for us to thrive, we had to be full on summer the whole time and whatever it took to get me there, right? And I didn't see that, no, thriving, excuse me, happens as a result of both. Now, I didn't listen, so nature knocked me out, right? And forced me to stay home, forced me to go out less, forced me to, stunned my mind so I couldn't even use it to think straight. It took quite a big whack from the universe to wake me up to the peaceful side of life. And for many of you too, I know. But it does whatever it takes. But there is a gentle invitation to slow down. Once we get present, we hear it more easily. And there's a gentle invitation to get more active. If we're quiet, we hear it, right? But what happens is, so nature is doing its thing. It's inviting us to be more active, come this way and play and engage in the world. Or it's inviting us to be more quiet, which is like, you don't need to engage so much, so I'm just going to take you out of the game for a little bit. And then our personal mind jumps in and tells stories about that, right? So it says, well, you need to be doing more all the time, or you need to, you shouldn't be lying on the sofa, you should be getting up doing stuff. Or you shouldn't be doing so much stuff, you should be taking a break. And the mind, again, as we've talked about before, creates these concepts and distinctions. It creates work, life, and then tries to balance them, right? With just crazy concepts. It creates too much, too little. It creates rest and activeness. It creates all these ideas and judgments about what we should and shouldn't be doing. Like what's too fast, what's too slow, what's too busy a mind, what's too quiet a mind, what's all this analysis that we get distracted by because it's in the form it's easier to see. And what I'm inviting us to take a look at here is that to get some respect for the intelligence behind life. It's like you see how perfectly nature does its thing when left to its own devices. And despite our worst efforts to mess it up, it still does its own thing. It does it beautifully and intelligently. Just what's required, just in the moment. And that same force is operating our lives. It's taking us into the game and out of the game, whatever that means. It moves us this way and that. It moves us fast, it moves us slow. There's an intelligence that is living our lives for us. And then there's the stories of the personal mind on top, which are blah, 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 the whole way through. So if we look outside our windows, especially as the seasons turn, we can get a respect for the fact that our moods are going to be high and low and everything in between. It's just the way of it. If I don't know where we get the idea that our mood should always be good, that we should always be thinking clearly, that we should never get confused, we should never get anxious, we should never get scared, we should never feel terrified, we should never feel angry, we should never feel jealousy, we should never feel envy, we should never feel judgment, criticism, analysis, self-doubt. Like, I don't know where we got those stories from. Personal development literature, probably. But it's just the way of it. There's human weather. It comes, it goes. It does its thing. There's a bigger intelligence that we cannot even begin to fathom as to the why. And so we get to have the weather occur. We get to have the seasons occur, but the constant is nature. In the weather metaphor, the constant is the sky. And that's why we're not buffeted about by the seasons. We're not buffeted about by the weather. We're not a victim of any of them. They occur. That's it. That's just the way of it. They occur. And the degree to which we get a sense that nature is the constant underneath the changing seasons and it's not going anywhere, that the sky is there beneath the changing clouds and weather and it's not going anywhere, and that all of those represent our true nature, that stillness inside which all of the comings and goings and the form takes place. But that true nature is constant and it's not going anywhere. We start to, our relationship to the weather, to the seasons, to our moods, to our proclivities to be in action or rest, our relationship to that becomes more neutral, becomes more peaceful. Our relationship with it becomes more accepting, and we start to see the beauty more in all of it. So here's my flowers this week. So these are my all white dahlias, and they're just starting to turn actually, and I could have a lot of thinking, I don't want them to die, I want them to stay around forever, it shouldn't be like that. But the beauty of flowers is in their ephemeral nature, right? In their transient nature. We get to appreciate them for the short time that we're here. And then I brought you these because these are dead flowers. But look at the beauty in these, right? Like so beautiful, more beautiful now than they were before. And this is, to me, this represents something about our lives, right? That I read somewhere recently and I thought this was beautiful. That as we age, it's like our form starts to fade and the essence that we truly are can shine more brightly. And if we see the older people in our lives as a reflection of that, it's such a beautiful way to think of our bigger season, if you like, our move in life from spring to summer to autumn to winter. And see that what happens is the pure essence, the pure beauty, as the form starts to fade, the beauty that's constant underneath all of that becomes more apparent. And as we see that, as we get insight into that, as we see the truth of that for ourselves, our relationship to the whole longer seasonal nature of life starts to shift and change as well. So the seasons have so much to teach us on a daily, on an hourly, and on a lifetime level, that we have the opportunity to see the perfect timing of everything, and we have the opportunity to see the perfection behind the ebbs and the flows. We get to see the constant behind all of it. And as we see more of all of that, we become more graceful. Our personal minds start to be more in sync, more in harmony with the bigger mind. And whenever that happens, just a more graceful, more enjoyable, more peaceful, more beautiful experience of life is what happens as a result. So share in the Facebook group, let me know what you're hearing, and I'll be back with you next week for the final video in this series. Take care.